When we were in Santa Fe last month, we had a really good conversation with leadership of rural development of USDA. And today we have an opportunity to have kind of a parallel conversation with the Small Business Administration. It is axiomatic that entrepreneurs and small businesses are engines of economic activity in rural areas. But rural small business people have special challenges, challenges with physical isolation, with connectivity, with limited access to capital. So we're fortunate to have some great leaders from SBA today to talk about their work in the rural West and how they're deploying resources to prioritize rural development. Jeremy Field, the regional administrator for Region 10, was supposed to join us. I guess he's had some transportation challenges. So we have a all-star pinch hitter in Joel Nania. But we're going to start with George Brown, who's the Assistant Administrator for Intergovernmental Affairs for SBA. So, George.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jim. We really appreciate the invitation to be here, and to Governor Little and the team here in Idaho. Appreciate hosting this important workshop and this forum and the good work that you all do at the WGA. I know our previous administrator, Linda McMahon, really enjoyed the opportunity to speak at your winter meeting last year, so we've appreciated the chance to continue to partner with the WGA and your member governors on the important work of economic development and entrepreneurship in their state. So my name is George Brown. I'm with the Small Business Administration. I'm based in our headquarters in Washington, D.C., but it's always most beneficial to be out of Washington, D.C., across the country, and I've had a really unique opportunity in my time at the agency to travel and meet with entrepreneurs, meet with small businesses, engage in events like this, and that's always the most beneficial thing for me and for the agency to understand what's really happening across the country. And I'm certain there's a solid foundational base level understanding of what the SBA is, but one of the things that surprises me the most, and even when I was coming in to the agency, is everything that the SBA does. When you hear SBA, probably the first thing you think about is an SBA loan. That's what we're known for. That's our flagship program. And the reality is we don't even make loans. We just guarantee them. We partner with private financial institutions and guarantee those loans. But we're much more than that. We have a small business contracting office that ensures that the government is meeting its benchmarks of doing business with small businesses. We have a office of counseling where we partner with what we call our resource partners across the country of small business development centers, women business centers, our SCORE chapters of volunteer executives. We have this incredible network of resource partners across the country that provide free, in most cases, counseling to entrepreneurs or business owners looking for some advice. We have an incredible office of veteran business development that offers counseling and training to our Patriot veterans who are returning home and have that entrepreneurial spirit and are looking to get into business themselves that we help operate. We have an Office of International Trade, and that's so critical right now for small businesses, especially with the pending USMCA agreement to help small businesses export and grow their businesses abroad. And one other office that often gets overlooked is our Office of Disaster Assistance, and that's when disasters strike anywhere across the country. The agency, the one time we actually make direct loans, not just to small businesses, to businesses of any size, and also to homeowners to help them recover after disaster. So I always like to remind everybody everything that we do at the SBA. We like to say we power the American dream, and we've really put an emphasis on what I think a shared goal and priority of the WGA is, and that's rural economic development. From day one, of this administration with this agency. It's been a priority. We've recently made some real inroads. It started last April with a MOU that we signed with USDA, where we're co-branding and really leaning on each other to market our lending products and our other products that I mentioned across rural parts of the country that too often times have been forgotten. So we've really been very proud of that partnership that we've had with USDA in making sure that folks across rural America are aware of our products, that our district offices, we have 68 across the country, are knowledgeable in USDA's products, that the USDA local offices are knowledgeable in the SBA products, and make sure that whatever you're looking for in terms of federal assistance, particularly on the lending side, that the federal family is educated on the products that will serve that potential startup best. Another initiative on the policy side that I wanted to mention, and then I'll let Joel talk about the good work that the office is doing here locally. Last week from our contracting office, part of that we operate the Hub Zone program for the federal government, and that's the historically underutilized business zones. These are census tracts that are designated geographically that provide special incentives for businesses to be Hub Zone certified and therefore be qualified for further government contracts. Last week, our program office issued a final direct rule that will allow governors to petition the agency to change those Hub Zone lines. Historically, those lines and those tracks have been set solely on data driven by the census. Now governors will have an opportunity annually to ask the agency based on some set criteria to change those lines, but the baseline of being able to redesignate some areas as hub zones in your state is that it's a area outside of an urban tract in your state with a population of 50,000 or less, so specifically targeted to rural populations. And we also see some opportunity, pun intended, on opportunity zones, because not every hub zone is an opportunity zone, not every opportunity zone is a hub zone. So now governors will be able to look at that map with their economic development teams and be able to ask the agency to change those lines in their state. So there are a host of other initiatives that we're working on policy-wise and delivering as an agency when it comes to rural economic development that I'm happy to talk more about. But I'd welcome Joel to talk about what's going on here locally too.
Great. But before we turn it to Joel, though, let me ask the audience, how many of you have worked directly with SBA in the past, either as an entrepreneur or as a sister agency? Not many, so we've got a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we're going to learn more. All right, so Joel, Nania is the manager of the Spokane.
You have to say that Nania.
Nania, I'm
say
sorry.
it in Italian.
Nania.
You say it in English, it comes out all right.
I apologize. Joel is the manager of the Spokane Branch Office of SBA, and why don't you tell us about your great work here?
Yeah, and Jeremy sends his sincere apologies. He really wanted to be here, and his travel schedule, caught up to him eventually, and he just couldn't make it. But I'm really thrilled to be here. And I think one of the most important points that George talked about is, I think in the last 4 years, I've been with the SBA for almost 7 years. In the last 4 years, the folks like George that we work with out of DC are really responsive to local communities, and they're really responsive to questions about, well, can we do this? Can we change this? And it hasn't been, in my experience now for the last 7 years, it hasn't been like, well, no, we've always done it that way. We're not going to make that change. Take the hub zone policy and designations before. We had some questions from local stakeholders. Well, wait a minute, this is definitely should be a hub zone. This is a historically underutilized business zone, including rural areas, designated rural. And it's like, gee, Post Falls looks rural, or just south of Post Falls that looks rural, but maybe it's not because it's too close to Coeur d'Alene. And our headquarters has been very responsive to local input and we have people on the streets and out in the field that can respond to those requests. And the people in DC are taking it to heart and listening and making changes to make our services more available. So any of you who are not from this area, you're going to find the exact same resources wherever you're from, so you can take that message back to your communities. And there is an SBA office or a resource partner, or SBDC, Women's Business Center, Veterans Business Outreach Center, SCORE office that's going to be close to you and can help your entrepreneurs. So we're all about really hands-on, in the field, making things work. You mentioned opportunity zones. Having a meeting and discussing with stakeholders. Our regional administrator, Jeremy Field, hosted an event in Boise, and they brought in 60 to 70 stakeholders in conjunction with the governor's office and the Department of Commerce to talk about, okay, what is this opportunity zone thing? How can communities prepare to take advantage of that opportunity of being in an opportunity zone, and how can they access that $350 billion that's going to be available to invest in communities who need the assistance starting January 1st. How do we do that? And we're happy to sit down and work with the stakeholders, and because we don't necessarily have all the answers right off the top of our head, but we know who to ask, and we know how to help them put together a plan to access programs like that. So it's really, it's fun to be working with the SBA. I think the best thing is that both sides of the aisle like us quite a bit.
We are not only bipartisan, we feel we're nonpartisan.
That's right. So everybody likes small business, and I come from an entrepreneurship background, and working with small businesses is really a great thing. In this area where we sit now, have any of you, how many people is this your first trip to the inland Northwest? So most of you have been here before. Wow. And hopefully you all know what the inland Northwest is, but it's all of eastern Washington and North Idaho and sometimes a little chunk of Montana. But we have the same resources here that you have in Lubbock, Texas. And those resources are consistent throughout the United States. So, I mean, as far as programs go, right here, we have the Small Business Development Center. George mentioned that. Those are full-time certified business advisors that will work with a small business, and they do not charge for their services. They'll sit down with them once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever that business needs, and they'll help them develop their business. So we're all about hands-on kind of assistance.
Well, when I asked if folks had experience with SBA, the couple of hands that went up, I think might have belonged to the Washington Association of Business. I'd love to hear, and maybe there are others too, and I think we'd love to hear your experience with SBA, and I know these gentlemen would appreciate the feedback, whether it's to lavish praise on them or to offer constructive criticism. So think about that. But in the meantime, I've got a question or two. You've got a pretty focused economic development mission, but you're not the only federal agency that has such a mission. And you mentioned the MOU, I think, with USDA, because you've got rural development, you've got the Economic Development Administration. Talk a little bit more about the relationship of SBA to these other federal economic development agencies. How do you work together? Are the lanes pretty clear? Is there a lot of overlap?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's something that, again, has been a priority for us as an agency, particularly as we're looking through the lens of rural economic development. It's begun with the partnership with USDA, and it's also been based upon a lot of the feedback that our previous administrator, Linda McMahon, and now our acting administrator, Chris Pilkerton, have been receiving from small businesses as they've traveled the country in terms of identifying those big policy issues that they're facing, because we view ourselves as the chief advocate for the nation's nearly 30 million small businesses, and as a member of the President's Cabinet, being able to represent that at the top levels on policy across the cabinet is very important. So for example, and we heard it come up on the last panel, the challenges that our small businesses are facing when it comes to workforce and workforce development. It's an issue we know across the country. what our acting administrator has done from hearing that feedback, taken it back to Washington, set up meetings with the Department of Labor, who have jurisdiction over the state and regional and local workforce development boards. SBA historically has not had a seat at the table. We've been engaged, we've been involved, but we haven't had maybe our office manager, our district director sitting on that local workforce council or workforce board. We're now talking with labor of ways that we can get a seat at the table to make sure that the small businesses in that part of the state or part of the country are formally represented. So it's examples like that where we're trying to break down these silos across the federal family and work for the common cause of supporting our small businesses and entrepreneurs across the country.
Yeah, and I would add, for example, in this area, the Inland Northwest, does anybody know where Ione, Washington is? Do we? Just a few of you. The USDA contacted us because they had some connections to people who live in Ione, Medellin, and Medellin Falls. And if any of you know that area, there was a big mine that shut down recently. They only have about 900 people in the population, and 150 of them lost their jobs. And so the USDA worked with us. We went and met with the Economic Development Council in Ione, and we put together a workshop with them to determine what programs from the USDA would be applicable in their area, what SBA programs would be applicable, particularly through our resource partners. And it's actually going to culminate, and we don't like to be the federal agency that comes in and says, hi, great to see you, and we never come back again. We actually send resources in following a meeting like that and a get-together like that. And we're actually going to have SCORE advisors go in. They have an interest in developing that Pend Oreille River Valley. Strangely enough, it falls outside of opportunity zones, but we're maybe working on that. But we take action. I met a couple of weeks ago with one of your lunchtime presenters, Colleen Rawson, with the Silver Valley Economic Development Corporation. She's sitting over there. And we were just talking, we're going to, as a part of that planning process that they went through with the EPA, who we partnered with, we're going to put together a small business development day in February and bring in stakeholders who are interested in that whole Silver Valley, which is a beautiful part of the country and somewhat underserved, and they've just got great momentum there, and we want to help any way we can there. So we're working, and we're actually going to talk about, well, how do we get you prepared to take advantage of opportunity zones, right, Colleen? Between you and I, we can figure that out. Yeah, so those kinds of things, and that's happening all across the country, and it's fun to be a part of that.
The Association of Washington Businesses is a big deal. I think it's got thousands of members. It's got huge companies that it represents, like Boeing and Microsoft. But I understand that over 90% of its membership employs 100 people or less, so small businesses. So I'd be really interested if you're willing to share, Rich or Mike, your members' experience with SBA, if it's a resource that they find valuable, and any other commentary you might have.
And if it's not positive, we can take it. We can learn from it.
So my name is Rich Hadley, and I live in Spokane, Washington, and I was the head of the Greater Spokane Incorporated, which is the chamber and EDC, for 21 years before I retired from that, and now work with AWB on a number of things. One is this rural strategy, and Mike is sort of the tip of the spear on the rural strategy, and he's also on the government affairs side of AWB. AWB has 7,000 members, so yes, and you named some of the large ones, and they are everywhere. And we have a grassroots alliance of 90 chambers that are all over the state that work together. And part of the rural strategy will include them because 30 out of 39 counties in Washington state are rural. With respect to the SBA, I think if we always look at the SBA as an asset. among a number of assets. And I think on the rural strategy, SBA and USDA rural development are two key ones in the public sector that AWB is looking at as it looks at the rural strategy. Add to that university extension programs, and add to that utility efforts similar to what Avista is doing in rural entrepreneurship and rural leadership, all add together. AWB's focus is on jobs, obviously, as a state chamber of commerce, also on business climate, so how do companies prosper, and part of business climate are things like having access to capital and also having sometimes a federal partner who can help break down some of the regulatory burdens, as you mentioned earlier. Also, AWB focuses on workforce development, which is a huge issue in the rural communities, how we keep our young people back in the rural communities to add vitality, but also where are the jobs. And at the last session in Santa Fe, the whole remote workforce panel was really impactful, I think, for our thinking on that. AWB also looks at infrastructure in their main, what I'd say, portfolio. So I'd say SBA and the Washington Economic Development Group, the Economic Developers Association, Rural Development Extension, community colleges, which are everywhere, are a great asset too. And I think I would say this is part of what the State Chamber's Rural Strategy is about, but having been a local chamber, we co-located the SBA with us. And I think that says a lot about having those services close by. So I think other state chambers could also do this within your rural states as WGA, similar to what's happening with the Association of Washington Business, and having been in some of those states, that may or may not be happening.
Great, thank you.
One thing, if I could mention, and that's all very, very helpful context, and it's come up, and we recognize the challenge of access to capital, particularly in rural America, and particularly now as we're, hard to believe, entering the year 2020 already. But what we've seen, and it's no secret that you're seeing the smaller community-based banks literally having disappeared off the map over the past decade or so, and you're seeing that transition away from the physical branch locations. What we've done as an agency, and would encourage you all to utilize this tool, have created what we call Lender Match. And it is an online portal on our website, sba.gov/lendermatch, where you, as an entrepreneur, as a small business looking for capital, can plug in your information, your data, and then that is then filtered and fed to our SBA network of national lenders for your area. So it could be a regional bank that covers where you are, or perhaps a larger national SBA partner that is an SBA lender. What this has done has enabled folks that may not be able to drive to their local SBA lender that's an hour down the road, but at night when they're done working on the ins and outs of their business plan, can plug in what they have, and that is then distributed out to our network of lenders, who then can reach out to that individual and see if it's a right fit for them. So it's a way that we as an agency are leveraging our technologies and our lending partners to try to allow folks in a more digital, virtual way to be able to access those SBA lenders to access capital.
Right, thank you. Rich mentioned the telework panel that we had in Santa Fe last month, and I moderated that panel, and I confess my aversion to telework. And since that time, we actually had a remote work day, and I really liked it.
Hello, my name is Barbara Petty, and I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Idaho, and I'm the Director of Extension. And the reason I just wanted to add to this conversation, and I appreciate the comments already about Extension, in the fact that this is an area that is very important to us, especially workforce development. Small Business Association has been really great to help with this. And in previous positions I have held, we've really partnered well, and it's really been a great benefit to us. And I just want to encourage you all, if you may not be familiar with Extension and what we do, please stay for this afternoon. But there's lots of opportunities, and I think it's important for us to break down the silos and start working together a little bit more. And we're working in community development in ways that might be beneficial.
That's great. Thank you, Barbara.
You
And I
know,
know-
a word on extensions. I, of course, had 6 years of college, and nowhere in there did they teach you how to do a business plan. So I went to the University of Wisconsin Extension, and they had a course called How to Write a Business Plan.
Right.
And that level of education is so practical and so valuable. Right down the road here, the national award-winning North Idaho College, and their award was in entrepreneurship education. And they've really focused on hands-on helping people in that community learn how to start a small business. So I applaud the extensions. It's really very practical, useful information. I mean, Sociology 101 was okay, but you know.
And I know that Barbara's done a tremendous amount of work in financial literacy as well, and I think I probably need to take your program, and I love the name of it, Night of the Living Debt. Right? So,
Good program.
Hi, my name is Diane Gassaway. I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. And later this afternoon, you're going to be speaking about cooperatives and rural development. In 2018, the federal government passed the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. And I wonder if you could speak to that and what's happening in order to implement it. The center where I work, we deal with and work with providing technical assistance to all kinds of cooperatives. We've done renewable energy, housing, manufactured housing, education, preschools, you name it. If it's a business, it's potentially a cooperative business. But one of the up-and-coming sectors that's getting more and more traction is the development of worker cooperatives and the opportunity with our aging population for employee ownership. So where are we at with that?
Well, I can speak on the bill you mentioned. I know that the agency worked closely with the small business committees as that was being worked on and has now been passed and implemented. The agency has been implementing that as directed by Congress. We've put out some new marketing materials from our lending office to provide training to our lenders, training to our SBDCs, to our district offices so that they're knowledgeable, which was a big requirement of that act, if I recall correctly, to be able to market those opportunities to employee-owned businesses. The challenge, as you know, with cooperatives and our lending program is our lending programs require a personal guarantee, a personal commitment from that business. We are stewards of taxpayer dollars, and taxpayer dollars are on the line. It's a shared risk between the agency, the financial institution, and the business owner, and we believe that the business should have skin in the game as the taxpayers do. So that's where the challenges lay with cooperatives and their legal structure and being able to provide for that personal guarantee. But we look forward to continuing to work on ways that we can partner together, and if you can help us, market our resources, and we're glad to provide the marketing materials that we have out there. We want to ensure that the SBA is not the best kept secret in government, and I feel that's been the case for far too long. So we are all about partnering and making sure that folks know about our resources.
And we do recognize that opportunity. I did succession planning for 3 years through a certified public accounting firm. And people call me regularly and say, Joel, if you were going to start a small business today, what would it be? And my answer at this point is I would find an existing small business with owners who've been at it for 25 or 30 years and are seriously considering transitioning their ownership of that business. And oftentimes it'll be, I'll get a call from an employee within that business. And I was thrilled to hear that our headquarters is seeing that national trend of baby boomers who are kind of ready to pass things on and opening the doors a little bit wider for employee-owned businesses. And maybe it's not necessarily a cooperative structure. It could be 4 or 5 of the existing employees want to take over the business and put together a structure of a program to take over ownership. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, like an employee stock ownership program. It can be a group of working employees who alone couldn't afford to buy the business, but with 4 or 5 of them putting their resources together can afford to buy the business. And we're working to work with the lenders to let them know that the SBA is saying those kinds of loans are okay, and we want to make sure we've opened the door enough so that a community works hard to get a business with 15 employees, and we don't want those doors to just shut down and lose 15 jobs. We want to maintain those jobs and then continue to grow the businesses.
Great. Over here.
Hi, my name is Jorge Guzman, and this question is for George Brown. So I am somewhat familiar with the SBA, and one of the things that I've noticed across the board is that when it comes to supporting diverse businesses or minority-owned businesses, the tendency seems to be around food and small retail stores. What are some of the initiatives that you are doing to kind of promote innovation or perhaps new technologies from diverse entrepreneurs?
That's an excellent question. We have a couple of products within our agency that are aimed specifically at innovation and technology. For the government, we administer the SBIR, STTR program, which is Small Business Innovation program across the country that is the collator. Although we don't deliver dollars ourselves, we collate amongst the federal agencies that do research and innovation and host road tours, host seminars with universities, with research institutions, provide some grant dollars to help target those specific sectors of research and innovation. We are, again, the sole collator to ensure that those federal agencies are looking at small business opportunities when the government's looking at deploying resources for innovation and technology and development. So that's within our Office of Innovation and Investment with the agency, or you can always go to sbir.gov to find out more about that program.
Well, and I think it's very elegant that last question addressed food, because it's time for lunch. It is a very quick 30 minutes for me. I'm sure we could go much longer, but
and Jim, if I could just
sure,
add before we
sure.
wrap, the input that we've received here is just so helpful to us, particularly from a policy side out of Washington. We have excellent district offices across the country who are really carrying out the mission of the agency to support economic growth through small businesses across the country. But if we're not getting the policy right in DC, it makes Jules' job and everyone else's across the country that much harder.
Make my job easy.
We're trying. We're a small agency, and that means we can be innovative and lean and do things that are more sensible and make it easier to work, and we want to make sure our programs are working for communities across America. So any input that you can continue to provide to us through WGA, through our
your
district
local
offices,
SBA office.
please, we're always very appreciative of that input.
great, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much. So lunch is served. Buffet line is over there. Feel free to get in the front of the line if you're the governor of a state. And we'll commence our next program at 12:30. Thanks.